what kind of services are we talking about?
Yeah, it could be secure identification. Also, you could take some of the EU projects and say, if 27 countries have to agree, then it will take a very long time. If we take some of these projects out and say, okay, we make them as Nordic or Baltic projects, then we could do it quicker. We can be a test bed for European solutions. So I think you can take a lot of the lists from European projects and say, which of these could be used for some Nordic or Baltic experimentation, so we come first. I think that would be a clever attitude.
Okay, reactions to this speech? Martin?
Yeah, I'm unsure where to start. I think it's great that the cases you mentioned, they're very concrete, and I think having that sort of action-based learning on a mutual basis is really, really key. And you know, doing stuff instead of talking about it is also important. I think as an entrepreneur, you sometimes have the sense of living in the future because you're always ahead of your company, but it also moves very fast. And some of the challenge I think is around mentality and the workflow, the work processes in big public companies is just different. And for instance, you mentioned 2020, I think that's probably a realistic goal, but I know in 20 weeks my business might not be here if I don't do something tomorrow. So there's definitely something to overcome here. But we would really, for instance, my company, we try to work with, take conferences into the cloud. And I know that the public sector, specifically the university and higher educations, they put a lot of money into events, having congresses and conferences. And we would like to be the platform for that. And it's a freemium model, so what's not to like? But we need to work together, and we would love to do that. But I wouldn't know where to start. Maybe I'll ask my friend over here, but it's certainly something we're interested in. We just sometimes struggle with finding the right approach or the right person to approach, and I think that's, we need some shoulders to stand on or someone to help us make that intro maybe.
Yeah, okay. Okay, from a politician's point of view, Markus?
Well, I have no any competence concerning ICT sector at all, but I suppose that when we speak about the public-private partnership, I would like to emphasize the significance of the small and medium-sized companies. And that's why I have been as a member of the unofficial Finnish parliamentary committee. And we deal with especially how does the public sector can push the SMEs to grow and inspire them to grow. And the main issue and the main task and measure which we proposed to the Finnish government also is that the public sector has to direct and public procurements and purchases to some part of the purchases and procurements to SMEs. And I have heard that, for example, in the USA, there is some states which has very good experiences, this kind of activities, and they have created new jobs and new businesses by this way, that they focus procurements to SMEs.
Okay, Jørgen?
I would like to repeat a remark made by Tom in the beginning, namely that IT is an enabler for development in any field these days. Sometimes people forget that and sort of mention IT together with lots of other interesting disciplines, chemistry, biotechnology, or whatever. None of those fields will be able to develop without strong IT competences. So IT has a very special role, and this is often forgotten, and it's just another technology. No, it's not just another technology. It's a prerequisite for any kind of development.
Yeah, It's not just technology, because you're right there. But looking at, for instance, the projects I've read about that there are public-private partnerships, it's often like, you know, traditional infrastructure. Like here in Sweden, in Stockholm, we have the Karolinska new hospital building, which is a public-private partnership. But that's a building. It's going to be there for like 40 years, and it's going to be used, and there are like very good and sound business models that are built up that, and how it's going to be run and stuff like that. But when you go over to the intellectual property side of things and start doing like a public-private partnerships in terms of software or a data exchange or whatever, what are the differences between the building a road and having a toll road, or building a, for instance, e-health care system?
Yeah, I think it's important to split between public-private partnership and public-private ownership, because I think it's more interesting, at least for my members, to have partnership but not joint ownership. I think when you talk about joint ownership, then it is exactly hospitals or buildings, or you can say constructions, assets, which are not interesting. So what we need is, in fact, that the public sector becomes a more intelligent buyer. So at the end of the day, we want just to have contracts and to deliver good service, maybe with some extra on the top, but we don't want to be locked in by the public sector, so that we have joint ownership. We have some minor experiments, and the losers have always been the companies, and the public sector have saved some money. So I think what we really want is that the public sector buy our services, buy development things, and I think that's the important thing, that they take the risk about development contracts, and then also accept that it will take longer time, and of course this risk thing means that you get a conflict about the discussion about who will you contract with, because to reduce the risk, then we say, oh, we take some of the bigger, well-known companies with small letters, IBM, CSC, so on, instead of using some local company who could probably do it as efficient as the big ones. So there's a balance to be found, and I think that the only way to break the ice is to try to do it. Instead of all these discussions. So what we need is, of course, to have some ambitions, also strategies. I think you talked earlier about who should make the strategies and so on. Are strategies important? I think strategies are important because it gives some transparency, that you from the industry can see, which plan do you have for the public? What are the roadmaps which we can foresee? But the most important thing is execution, and I think public sector is very bad to make real execution, which we can count on. So that if I should have the final wish is that the public sector will be more consequent and be better to execute their ideas.
I may add that another role for the public is to put extremely high demands. So we really have to stretch and be on our toes to deliver, because the public can have a role here in putting higher demands than what is probably at the moment feasible on local market trends. And if we're able to meet those higher demands, of course, we have something that's interesting all over the world.
Markus, are you afraid of making mistakes in the public sector?
Yes, of course. Especially I think about the municipalities, because as we know, if we speak about the Nordic countries, the municipalities have very big role when we speak about the public services for the citizens. And that's why I suppose that we have to start up digitalization of municipal services as soon as possible. And I trust that by this way we have many possibilities to get more efficiency also to these services. And in my opinion, and we know that the demography development in the Nordic countries is quite challenging for us, and now is the best time to start up this digitalization, and we need some new innovation also, that how we can produce these services in future a little bit different way and utilize this digitalization and digital service, ICT innovation and so on.
So I have an open question for all the panel members. Is in which areas do you see ICT areas, of course? Do you see potential for growth when it comes to public-private partnerships? Do you have any special feelings of one discussions we had in Sweden is like digital signatures, and if for instance if the taxation authority can use it, maybe we could get access to our own journals, like medical journals. But then again, if you look at it from a public or governmental perspective, you probably want to have the taxes first, and then you'll take care of the services later on. But in what areas do you see? Like we've talked about e-prescriptions, we've talked about health care, we've talked about digital signage. Do you have any other areas that you think that will actually spur some growth within the region?
Energy. In Denmark, the government has made a fairly ambitious plan that by 2050 we should be fossil-free. Now this is a huge challenge, and most of the channels is an ICT challenge. Just like we see in the financial sector is now ICT-based. Going to a bank or an insurance company, it's IT jobs. In 20 years we'll see going to an energy company, it's no longer about burning coal in the most efficient way. It's about utilizing the data, about usage, distributing the energy. This is a huge IT challenge, tremendous challenge. And I think this is probably an area where the values of the Nordic populations can come to an advantage. I think we have populations that are relatively aware of this challenge and are prepared to do things to change their lifestyles and so on. And we can probably take a huge step forward.
I agree with Jørgen. So we have in DI a smart grid network with companies who are either in the electricity industry or they are delivering technologies which can be used for smart metering, smart management of your energy consumption. And I think what is needed now is some standards for smart grids, and instead of just making some Danish standards, we try to go to Brussels and say, okay, we need some giant European standards, but again, here could be an area where the Baltic region could be the front runner in the European Union, because we have from older time the Nordic cooperation, where the Scandinavian countries already have their grids together, and I think if you took that core and expanded it with the whole Baltic region, then we could do some experiments where we were quicker than some of the other European partners and got our own standards, and then we could, shall we say, make a locomotive for North European industries. That is one thing. You also ask for other aspects. As we have in Denmark very strong plans now for the whole communication between citizens and companies to the public, where 80% of all communication should be digital in 2015. That's soon. And we have some waves where more and more areas are put on a digital platform, and you cannot send letters to the public. Letters are forbidden. So that's really doing things. But these are only, you can say, in the expenditure connection, small things. So the big monies are spent on healthcare, education, social welfare. So if you really want to renew the public sector and give us the lower taxes, which we need to be entrepreneurs and could realize our plans, then we need much stronger digitalization of the basic public services. And these are health, social care, education. So I think, again, here we could find some joint things. And of course, languages are different, but I think that our pedagogical style is probably more similar here in the Baltic region than if you go to the whole Europe, where some of the southern countries have other traditions for, learning. That is no. So I think there's a lot of potential there.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree that some of the big ones will be health and education and energy. And I would really love to see the public sector set a very high standard, a world-leading standard, but also work much closer with entrepreneurs, with the private sector, in developing the product that is supposed to meet that standard. I mean, we've developed a welfare model that's being exported to some extent to the rest of the world, or at least the rest of the world is inspired by it. So why isn't that we can, perfect that, I don't know, a travel system or, tools for education that we can export on a private basis as well?
I just want to say that, just hold that thought 2 minutes. I'd like to thank you, Markus, because you're leaving for the aeroplane back to Finland. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much. With that said, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if I was done, but I also agree with what was said with technology, the role of technology. It will enter every level of society. Last year, someone really clever said that software is eating the world, and the businesses that do not understand that will die or become extinct. So ICT is much more than just public, private, whatever. So as an entrepreneur, and I know many entrepreneurs out there, if you work with private or public, it doesn't really matter. You just need to make a business that works and scale that to a global market. And if the public sector could be much more instrumental in doing that, co-developing, co-marketing, and pushing that out through partnerships worldwide, that would be wonderful. So that more active role, setting the high standards and becoming, co-creator, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, if you're co-creator, you're probably co-risk taker as well. Is that interesting from your point of view? Because otherwise it's just procurement where you say, well, the government says we need this kind of system, and you say, hey, I can do it, and then 3 other guys say we can do it too, and then the government says, well, you're going to do it, and then we give you the money for it. But because I'd imagine that a real good private-public partnership is where you actually divide both the risk and the reward between the different parties. Or am I mistaken?
Yes, certainly. I mean, there's also, I don't know exactly how to answer that, but there's this, in the startup culture, we have some of the biggest trend, one of the biggest trend right now is the lean startup. How do you actually produce results with, almost nothing, no resources? And I think that mentality and doing stuff is, almost the opposite of what you see in the public sector, at least to some extent. You see all these big failed IT projects, from managing, whatever it is, right, or public transportation, all this stuff, and I certainly think there's something to learn from both sides, and so maybe that, I'm a big favor of action-based learning, like I said before, so let's try and work together more directly. That would be wonderful.
Okay. Let's see if we can wrap this up. When you think about the public-private partnership, probably in the ICT sectors, what do you think are the key incentives for the different parties that would actually make this happen cross-border? Do you have any ideas on that? Big question.
I think if you make cross-border solution, then you get some of that critical mass which we miss in a small country like Denmark, for instance. I think when I talk with some of the startups who try a new thing, okay, one thing is to get on the Danish market, get all the hospitals, or at least most of them. Then you have to turn further to Germany, Sweden, perhaps. I think if we start on a broader context, then we will get the critical mass from the beginning, and that means that we could make some little more ambitious, or maybe much more ambitious solutions. So I think there will be a lot of advantages in that.
I think the cross-border certainly raises the challenge. We have a saying in Danish, you shouldn't jump the fence where it's highest. Well, why not?
All right. Good question. What do you say?
Yeah, well, building for an international market can be a challenge if you live and you want to work with the public sector in a very small country. So that's obviously a limitation that you shouldn't impose on yourself. But for instance, for Issue, we started building for the US market. And again, with my new company, we seed that, as we call it, in the US market. Because we know the home market is not big enough. Yeah, these are just thoughts, I don't know.
That's okay. So, a big hand to the panel and the keynote speaker. Thank you so much.